Hey guys, it's Tim coming at you with a new episode of The Spotlight, the show where I pose an interesting question or just a general interesting idea and then have you guys take from there in the comments. So we are probably going to get to this issue at some point in time, but with all the news surrounding it nowadays, let's get to it now. The issue of representation in comic books. Meaning having representatives of different minority and social groups inside of the comics themselves. Black people, Muslim people, gay people, little people, just any type of group that's represented inside of comic books. I want to focus on what's the best way to get this type of representation into comics, and when we should and shouldn't ask for it. So to get this started, let's just say that representation is very important, not just from a socio-political standpoint of getting representation of everyone inside of society, but from a personal standpoint as well. Just like in real life, we connect to people who are similar to us, and we relate to them a lot better if we feel that they have something about them that we can personally see in ourselves. So the issue here isn't whether or not we should do it, because we definitely should, for a number of reasons. No, the issue here is how we should do it, and what may be some obstacles to doing it. Now, one way of doing it that's used fairly often is using an established brand or character in order to represent a particular group. And characters who are either legacy characters of previously established characters or spin-offs of previously established characters tend to fare a bit better in terms of longevity. Like Batwing for DC or Miles Morales for Marvel. But then we get to the idea of changing a character to represent a particular group. Like what's been happening recently with the Twitter campaign for Marvel to make Steve Rogers gay. And I get where people are coming from with this idea. I mean, the character has a previously established fan base supporting them, so by making this character a particular thing that they want to gain support for, they feel that they will gain that support through the character and their fan base. But the issue of this, as I see it, is twofold. The first one being that when people ask for these particular changes, they have the problem of viewing the character in a vacuum. Meaning that when they look at this character, they just see the character themselves and not the situations that they've been in or the context of the story that they're in. Which can make the change either confusing from a narrative standpoint, or can make it regressive from a character standpoint, even though the goal is to be progressive from a social standpoint. For example, when they made Iceman gay in All New X-Men, it didn't make sense to me from a narrative standpoint because he's already open about the fact that he's a mutant and persecuted for that, and he knows that his friends already accept other gay people, so he really had no reason to hide this fact. But that could just be me. The other problem that can arise from this is the fact that, and we've all been guilty of this at some point, we don't like things that we like to change. For example, when Ted Kord and Richard Rider died, even though they didn't have the biggest fan base, there was backlash against them being replaced, and that was a hurdle that Jaime Reyes and Sam Alexander had to overcome. And honestly, the most successful characters who are made to represent a particular minority group, whether deliberately or just because that's how they are, tend to be characters who are operating alongside the previously established character as opposed to ones who are just flat out replacing them. At least in a more immediate sense. For example, Miles Morales was able to overcome the fact that people were fans of Peter Parker because Peter Parker was still operating in the main universe at the time, and Miles was the ultimate Spider-Man, so you were able to have both of them at the same time. And the same with characters like Batwing, who was operating alongside Batman, or Kamala Khan, who just took the Ms. Marvel name after Carol Danvers had already left it. Which leads into how I generally view doing this, which is, I always feel it's better to create something new than to change something that's already there. But I acknowledge that this is a much harder thing to do, because building a new character with new mythos is a lot harder than having a previously established character with an established fanbase and mythos. But it works better in the long run, I feel, because it doesn't have the initial personal backlash from the fan base of the character who you're attempting to replace or change. and it makes the character stronger because it proves that they can stand on their own to a degree. This obviously won't work every time, but I still feel that it's the best option. But once you have these characters who are meant for representation in your comics, you run into other issues as well. And one of the reasons for this is that for writers, it's a lot harder to write a character who's something that you are not and present it in an accurate way. And there's a greater chance that you'll end up offending someone or end up presenting something in an inaccurate way if you have no experience or personal connection to it. Which is part of the reason why there's hesitation to add this representation into comics, because not all of the writers represent these particular groups. And companies don't want the negative press of potentially representing someone inaccurately or offensively by not having correct information about how to represent them, which leads to the hesitation to do it. Does this mean that they shouldn't do it? Well, definitely not. Look at Daredevil. When he was created, they thought that members of the blind community would be offended by the character because he's not an accurate representation of what it is to be blind. But, lo and behold, the character ended up being very popular among the blind community because now they had a representation for themselves in the comics who was represented in a fairly badass and competent way. Which leads me to my final point. When it's decided to create this representation into comics, there's always the risk that the fact that they are representing a particular group becomes the main defining characteristic of a particular character, which can be a problem in any medium. For example, if you have a character who's black and the thing that defines them more than any other personality trait is the fact that they are black. Or if you have a gay character, you have it so that the fact that they are gay is the thing that's presented most openly about them. And while you should obviously not ignore these facts about the characters because it does play a part into the lives of the character, focusing on them doesn't always create the most engaging of characters. Or in more basic terms, the group that they're representing should be what the character is, not who the character is. For example, let's take a look at Kamala Khan again. Now, the fact that she is Muslim is presented in her story, but it's not the defining part of her character, and that helps build a much more rounded character, which is why she's so popular among people. And while I'm sure that there's plenty more that can be said on this subject, and I'm sure that you guys will say it down in the comments, I've wasted enough of your time rambling on about this. So, what do you guys think about representation in comics, or really in any medium? And more importantly, how it should be handled? Well, remember to comment down below about it. If you're not currently subscribed to us, we would appreciate it if you click that subscribe button if you're interested. And if you feel so inclined, we have a Patreon account that you can donate to and help us out. But until next time, this has been Tim from the Spotlight, signing out.